You begin fasting not with intense hunger, but with a feeling that is difficult to name. The body feels lighter, not a euphoric lightness, but a quiet one, as if a constant background pressure has finally been released, like someone gently turning down the internal volume after years of nonstop noise. Many people mistake this moment for detox, believing the body is finally getting rest. But biology does not work in such a romantic way. Beneath that gentle sensation, a deep and demanding process of adaptation has begun, and it does not start in the stomach or the liver, but in the kidneys. In the first hours of fasting, your kidneys are not relaxing at all. On the contrary, they are dealing with an abrupt shift in the internal environment. That shift is insulin. For many years, chronically elevated insulin has been sending a clear signal to the kidneys. Retain sodium, retain water, maintain circulating volume in the context of frequent eating. Insulin is not only a blood sugar hormone, it is the silent coordinator of saltwater balance in the body. But when you begin fasting, insulin drops rapidly, almost without a transition period. For the kidneys, this is like losing an instruction manual they have relied on for years. The moment the insulin signal disappears, the kidneys respond according to pure physiology. Sodium begins to be excreted in the urine, and water always following sodium leaves the body with it. This is not a malfunction, but a well-described phenomenon in clinical physiology known as fasting-induced natriuresis. This mechanism explains why, in the first 24 to 48 hours, you may lose weight very quickly, urinate more frequently, and feel your body deflate. But what matters is this: what you are losing is not fat, but water. And your body does not interpret this as a victory. When water and sodium leave too quickly, blood volume decreases. Circulatory pressure shifts. The body does not panic, but it immediately activates compensatory mechanisms. The adrenal glands increase the secretion of aldosterone, a hormone whose role is to retain sodium in order to protect circulation. This process is quiet, but you begin to feel it through very ordinary signs. Mild dizziness when standing up, unexplained fatigue, sometimes a dull, persistent tightness in the lower back. Many people misinterpret these signals. They think they are weak. They think fasting is unsuitable. They think their body is failing. In reality, this is not an energy deficiency. It is a temporary electrolyte imbalance. The most common mistake at this stage is forcing down large amounts of water, believing hydration alone will fix everything. But plain water only dilutes the system further. The problem is not the amount of water, but the minerals that left along with it. A bit of sodium, a bit of potassium, a bit of magnesium is sometimes enough to make the discomfort disappear entirely. Fasting does not make you weaker. It simply exposes deficiencies that were already there, quietly masked by constant eating. As fasting deepens, the body begins to shift into a more ancient operating mode. Fat becomes the primary fuel, and the liver starts producing ketones to supply the brain. This is when familiar fears arise, especially fears about uric acid and gout. Blood tests may show elevated uric acid, and many people quickly conclude that fasting is damaging their kidneys. But the biology of this process is far more nuanced. Inside, the kidneys are narrow transport gates known as OAT transporters, responsible for moving organic acids into the urine. Both ketones and uric acid must pass through these same gates. During deep ketosis, ketones rise rapidly and arrive first. They are prioritized because of their survival role in low-energy states. Uric acid does not disappear, nor is it overproduced. It is simply delayed in excretion, temporarily accumulating in the bloodstream. This is a phenomenon called competitive inhibition, well documented in renal physiology literature. Importantly, a temporary rise in uric acid does not equal gout. Gout occurs only when uric acid crystallizes, a process that requires dehydration, low urine pH, and prolonged stagnation. If you are adequately hydrated, uric acid remains dissolved and is gradually excreted when conditions allow. Your body is not creating a new danger. The kidneys are simply reprioritizing tasks within a different biological context. The issue is not fasting itself, but fasting without rhythm, without pauses that allow the system to release accumulated pressure. What you are experiencing at this stage is not a failure of fasting. It is the moment the body is learning to operate under a different order, one in which insulin no longer commands every decision, and the kidneys must adapt back to their original biological role. And this is precisely where misunderstanding the signals leads many people to quit. But if you understand them correctly, you are standing right at the doorway to the deeper part of the story, where benefits and risks begin to clearly diverge. There is one point many people who fast never realize until the body begins speaking in increasingly uncomfortable ways. It is the difference between rhythmic fasting and fasting without an endpoint. In the early days, the body is still flexible. The kidneys can still cope. Electrolytes can be replenished quickly. Uric acid can rise and then fall. But when fasting becomes a rigid pattern, one meal every day, 20 hours without eating every day, carried on week after week, biology shifts states. It is no longer short-term adaptation. It becomes accumulated pressure. At this point, uric acid does not merely rise temporarily. It begins to linger longer. Urine becomes more acidic due to prolonged ketosis. And most importantly, urine gradually becomes more concentrated, often without you realizing it. Not because you are failing to drink water, but because your body has lost the ability to retain water efficiently when sodium is continuously excreted without being adequately replenished. This is the moment when many people say they still feel fine, while the kidneys are already being forced to operate in an increasingly harsh environment. The danger here is not loud. It does not arrive with sharp pain. It comes through very subtle signs. Darker urine in the morning, a vague but persistent thirst, a dull fatigue in the afternoon, or a sense of tightness and heaviness in the lower back that is easily blamed on posture or work stress. Biologically, however, these are signs that the river flowing through the kidneys is slowly drying up. When urine becomes concentrated, the minerals within it no longer move freely. They draw closer together. Calcium, always present in urine, now has more opportunities to encounter oxalate. And here, a major paradox emerges. One that most fasting guidelines overlook. The most common kidney stone worldwide, calcium oxalate, does not form because you eat too much oxalate, but because urine chemistry has shifted in a way that favors crystallization. Prolonged fasting reduces urine volume. Ketosis lowers urine pH, making it more acidic. Together, these two factors create an environment in which crystals not only form, but also have enough time to grow. What makes this particularly concerning is how silently the process unfolds. You feel nothing for weeks, even months. Meanwhile, microscopic crystals are learning how to adhere to the walls of the renal tubules, waiting for the moment they become a real problem. In a healthy body, natural protective mechanisms exist to prevent this. One of the most important is citrate. Citrate binds to calcium, keeping it dissolved and preventing oxalate from crystallizing. When urinary citrate levels are sufficient, kidney stones are difficult to form even when other factors are less than ideal. But this is precisely where deep, prolonged fasting creates an unfavorable spiral. Extended ketosis pushes the body into a state of mild metabolic acidosis. To protect itself, the kidneys begin reabsorbing citrate from the urine back into the bloodstream to use as a buffering agent against acid. This is a rational survival response. The consequence, however, is that urine becomes nearly depleted of citrate. The molecular guardian disappears from the front lines, and once citrate is gone, calcium and oxalate encounter little resistance. Magnesium, another subtle protective factor, also tends to decline in the context of prolonged electrolyte loss. This further weakens the kidney's natural anti-crystallization defenses. And so an uncomfortable paradox appears. You may be eating very clean, consuming very little oxalate, and fasting with great discipline, yet your urine chemistry is quietly becoming an ideal environment for stone formation. This is why lemon water, rich in citrate, is not a feel-good wellness trend. It is a very specific biochemical intervention. Citrate from lemon not only replenishes a missing protective factor, but also helps raise urine pH toward a less acidic range, slowing crystallization. In the context of fasting, this is not a small hack, but a way of restoring a defense mechanism the body temporarily sacrifices to counter acidosis. Yet even citrate cannot compensate for a deeper core issue: the absence of recovery rhythm. The kidneys were not designed to operate indefinitely under biological stress. They need periods when insulin returns, sodium is retained, urine volume increases, and accumulated acids have a chance to be flushed out. When fasting is practiced in pulses, days of normal eating alternating with days of fasting, with clear cycles, the system has room to breathe. But when fasting becomes a continuous wall, pressure is not released. It simply accumulates. This is why many people report feeling fine during the first few weeks of OMAD, only to encounter problems months later. Not because fasting suddenly becomes harmful, but because the body has shifted from adaptation to endurance. And the kidneys, like many biological systems, can endure for a very long time before speaking up. When they finally do, the problem is often no longer small. Fasting is not wrong. But fasting without recovery rhythm is a misunderstanding of biology. The kidneys do not need you to fast more. They need you to fast more intelligently. And it is precisely at this point that the story begins to shift from risk to potential, where fasting, when placed in the right rhythm, not only reduces the burden on the kidneys, but also activates deeper repair mechanisms within them. After passing through the initial chaotic phase of electrolyte loss, acidification, and stress-related adjustments, something very different begins to unfold inside the body if fasting is practiced with the right rhythm. This is the part most people never reach, not because it doesn't exist, but because they either stop too early or push too far. When the body realizes that scarcity is not a permanent threat, but merely one phase of a cycle, biological systems begin to shift from defense to repair, and the kidneys are among the organs that respond most clearly to this transition. In a state of low insulin that is not prolonged excessively, familiar growth signals are dialed down. mTOR, the pathway of growth, accumulation, and excess temporarily quiets. At the same time, AMPK and energy conservation signals are activated. This is precisely the gateway that opens autophagy, the process of cellular self-cleaning and recycling. For the kidneys, this is profoundly significant. Tiny filtering units previously forced to work non-stop under high glucose, high insulin, and excessive circulating volume finally gain the space to clean house. Autophagy is not mystical. It functions like a silent maintenance crew, moving through cellular structures, dismantling damaged proteins, inefficient mitochondria, and oxidative debris accumulated over time. Particularly important are podocytes, cells that protect the glomerulus with intricate, interlacing structures like woven hands. Podocytes are notoriously difficult to regenerate once damaged. But when autophagy is properly activated, they gain an opportunity to renew internal components, reduce oxidative stress, and restore structural integrity. At the same time, another subtle change takes place within the kidney's circulation. As insulin declines and blood volume is no longer chronically elevated, pressure within the glomerular capillaries decreases. This reduction in pressure does not weaken the system. It provides a rare form of physiological rest for the filtration apparatus. For many people, this is the first time in years that their kidneys are not operating in a state of chronic high load, and it is precisely within this quiet interval that recovery becomes possible. Many people approach fasting with the belief that it will deplete them. The paradox is that, when practiced rhythmically, fasting can actually make the kidneys more efficient and more resilient. Baseline inflammation declines, tissue edema decreases, cellular tension is released. There is no dramatic surge, no theatrical signal, just a gradual return of stability. a form of health that is quiet, but very real. However, it is precisely here that another subtle trap appears. When the body begins to feel better, many people assume they can push further, fast longer, rest less, be more disciplined. And that is when stress quietly returns in a different form. Cortisol, the hormone of vigilance and energy mobilization, begins to take center stage. In the short term, cortisol is an ally. It helps mobilize fuel, maintain blood pressure, and preserve alertness when food is scarce. But when fasting becomes a constant state, cortisol is no longer allowed to fully subside. It remains chronically elevated, exerting persistent microstress on the vascular system, especially the delicate capillaries of the glomeruli. This stress does not cause immediate pain. It does not produce obvious symptoms, but over time, it erodes the adaptive capacity of the filtration system. This is why early warning signs are so often overlooked. Mild afternoon fatigue unrelated to sleep, lightheadedness upon standing, dismissed as undereating, slightly elevated fasting glucose, misinterpreted as worsening metabolism, when in fact cortisol is antagonizing insulin. These signals do not shout, they whisper, and the kidneys are among the first organs to whisper. For those with more fragile physiological foundations, risk arrives sooner. Reduced kidney function, a history of kidney stones, electrolyte imbalances, or an already stressed adrenal axis significantly narrow the margin of tolerance. In such bodies, even small deviations in minerals or hydration can produce outsized consequences. Not because fasting is wrong, but because fasting is not personalized or placed in the proper context. And it is here that the core message of the entire story becomes clear. Fasting is not a test of willpower. It is not a competition to see who can endure hunger the longest. It is a subtle biological tool that demands respect for the body's rhythm. The human body did not evolve in a state of permanent abundance, but it was not designed for continuous deprivation either. It thrives in oscillation, in orderly movement between stress and recovery. When fasting is placed in the right rhythm, stress comes and goes. Cortisol rises and falls. Insulin withdraws and returns. Sodium is excreted and then retained. Uric acid is prioritized and then cleared. The kidneys work hard, but they are not exhausted. Autophagy is activated, but not prolonged to the point of destruction. And it is this alternation that creates sustainable health. The kidneys are not engines to be pushed to their limits. They are living tissue, requiring seasons of work and seasons of recovery. When you treat fasting as a rhythm rather than a rigid rule, you are cooperating with your biology instead of fighting it. And the reward for that cooperation is not a high, but stability, clarity, and resilience that do not require constant effort to maintain. Ultimately, the most important thing to remember is this: fasting is not an act against the body. When understood and practiced correctly, it is a reminder that your body still remembers how to self-regulate, self-repair, and self-protect. But like any sustainable relationship, it requires listening. When you listen to the early whispers of your kidneys, you are not just avoiding problems, you are learning how to live more in harmony with your own biology.